Do you have a story to share with the world? Of course you do. We all have stories to share. An Anchor podcast allows you to share your interests in a way that connects to others all across the globe. If you have been considering starting your own podcast and don't know where to begin, Anchor makes it easy to record, edit, and publish with the click of a button. You can even add music. Whether it's crime dramas, self-improvement, paranormal adventures, or tips about parenting, you too can share your unique imprint on the world. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. You've got this. I believe in you. Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tools and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively. Okay. All right, are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Making sure it says you're recording on your end, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Boy, do we have a show for you today. I have Jennifer Moore with me, and Jennifer has a master's in psychology and religion. She's also a master trainer in EFT tapping, which is also what I do as well. She's an author of the Empathic Mastery, and she's also a host of the Empathic Mastery Show. Welcome, Jennifer. I'm so excited to have you as a guest today.
Oh, Tanya, I am so thrilled to be here. And even just the beginning of this conversation, it's like we have so many things in common. And I can't wait to have this conversation with you today.
I love it.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm feeling your purple vibes today, that third eye. When I went on your website, it was just all that purple. And I'm like, I am feeling this today. So what are we going to talk about today? We are going to talk about the empath and the narcissist connection and how do we break that cycle. And Jennifer actually has talked about this a lot on her podcast. And so I haven't talked about it too much on mine. So I thought it would be really fun to have a guest on so we can have a dialogue about this conversation. So Jennifer, where should we start in this process?
Okay, so let's actually start by just like being sure that we're on the same page about the definition of empath. Okay. And so basically, because right now it's a buzzword and like everybody and their aunt is calling themselves an empath. And in my humble opinion, some people are definitely empaths and some people are like, really? Not sure that you are, but whatever, knock yourself out. So in my experience, basically, you've got a spectrum of experience in the world, and you've got on one side of it, you've got the narcissist, actually even further past the narcissist, you've got the psychopaths and the sociopaths who have absolutely no regard for anything other than themselves. And so you've got the people who are utterly and completely like everything. It's like it's the me show 24/7. And then on the other side, you have what I consider empaths, which are the people who are picking up the thoughts, the feelings, the energy, the sensations, the pain, the struggle, I'm trying to think of anything else to describe, but just like all of it, all the things that are coming from the world around them. And the thing about an empath is that an empath, when they are fully immersed in this and absorbing all the stuff, can get to a place where they don't know what end is up. They don't know where they are in time and space. They could be picking up something from the Civil War. They could be picking up something from the future. They could be picking up something from across the globe. They could be picking up something from another planet. And the thing about empaths that is really different than other people who have sort of the ability to be open to receiving information is that where, psychics, mediums, intuitives are all receiving information. The thing about all of those gifts or abilities is that they understand the separation between self and other. But the thing about an empath is that an empath, by our very nature, experiences the sensations and the stuff that is going on in the world around us as if it's our own. Yeah. We experience everything through our own filters. So I'll give you an example. I have a dear, dear, dear client who has a friend who has been sick. And one day my client was just sort of woke up feeling really out of sorts and suddenly just like really worrying about their health, really worrying about their mortality, really going through kind of like, oh my God, something must be wrong with me. And about, I don't know, maybe 12 hours later, they had a conversation with this friend who is in the middle of a health crisis, and heard verbatim the words that they'd been thinking in their mind coming through the mouth of their friend. And they went, oh, this isn't mine. This is hers. But the thing is that as empaths, we don't often understand the distinction. Now, somewhere in the middle between empath and sociopath, we have empathic and empathy. And the thing about our ability to be, and the thing about, so empathy is the ability to see what somebody else is going through and to have compassion, like to be able to understand that, to put ourselves in that person's shoes. Sympathy is in some ways the ability to recognize that somebody's going through something, but not necessarily feel it.
Yeah.
So we can have sympathy, but then empathy is that takes it one step further, where we can imagine it, we can kind of feel it, but we're still not experiencing it as if it is our own. So empathy is this amazing thing that so often, ironically, empaths do not have enough of, because empathy by its nature gives us the ability to recognize what's ours and what's not ours, whereas being an empath often means that we are feeling things that are not ours as if they are our own. And I'll give you a personal example of like how it can show up. Right when the war broke out in Ukraine, and there were all of those pictures of like people with their pets traveling, their dogs on leashes and their cats and cat carriers. And my little inner child, empath child, is like looking at these pictures, and I'm immediately transported to Ukraine. I'm immediately imagining myself with my dog Lilu, my little pug, with my two cats in the cat carrier, and I'm heartbrokenly leaving my home and fleeing in terror. And I'm suddenly experiencing this as if it's my own experience. And I was able to, because I've done a lot of work around this, I was able to kind of back the truck up and go, actually, you are not in Ukraine, my dear. You are not going through this experience. You are empathizing with them. You are seeing that. But let's just get clear about this. This is not your reality.
Mm-hmm.
And you are safe in Maine, in the United States. Your pets are safe, and all is well in your world. Let's just get a reality check here. And so I was able to really recognize that I was overly, not just empathizing, but I was really experiencing empathic overwhelm.
Yeah.
And I was taking on too much. And then suddenly I was just like, you know what? Let's just back that truck up and let's like work on empathy instead of empathic overwhelm. So from my perspective, we have sort of this, you've got the sociopath in one place, the what I call the compassionate carer in the next level, where it's like somebody who has the ability to, be sincere, be concerned, but they're not overwhelmed by the empathy. Then you've got people who are what I call sort of like, like they're super sensitive, where they're very sensitive. They might identify as using HSPs, highly sensitive people, where everything kind of can throw them off. They're very sensitive. They might see something on TV and cry as they watch it, but they're still not necessarily feeling the intensity the way an empath does. And then we have the people who are kind of at that very extreme of the extreme empath. And in terms of just kind of behavior, it's like sociopath, sympathizer, carer, sympathizer, empathizer, and then sort of empathic overwhelm. And there's sort of this spectrum that happens. And like I was saying, a lot of times, ironically, what we need as empaths is actually more of a capacity for empathy And I just realized that the reason my battery is going down is because my computer is plugged in, but it's not plugged into the wall. So excuse me for 1 second so I don't suddenly just like disappear on you. Okay, that is much better.
I love this conversation, Jennifer, because I love how you bring the psychology into it, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, when I worked in the hospitals, I was working with grieving families and I was recognizing I was carrying their grief for weeks and months. And I was like, why am I thinking about this family that I talked to 2 months ago? And so what I started to do is I started to shut off, you know, I couldn't handle it. It was that empathic overwhelm that you speak of. And then it was almost like I became so into myself and numb that I almost felt like I was being narcissistic a little bit because I was so struggling with the amount of emotion that I was carrying, you know, working with daily. I was dealing with death daily. I mean, it was intense for 15 plus years.
Intense. Well, and I think, you know, the whole idea that empaths and narcissists are so completely separated. And actually, in many ways, I actually really don't tend to put narcissist in the end category. I put sociopath and psychopath in that category because I actually think that a lot of times, like there's a fine line between being an extremely overwhelmed empath and being a narcissist, because we can get so utterly we can drown in the empathics, in the emotional soup, and we can find ourselves so completely overwhelmed by the emotional intensity and all the struggles that are going on that we can feel like the victim. We can feel like we are cursed. We can start to really go into the poor me. And I, you know, over the years that I've had my Facebook page and I've been engaging with, you know, other empaths for, you know, years and years and years in all kinds of different places, one of the common comments that I see frequently, both, you know, sort of sent to me as like PMs or in conversations with clients, and also just like in, you know, I post something and somebody comments, is that so many people regard this ability as a curse, not as a blessing, because it is so overwhelming. And I just want to say, I have met so many people who made the decision to shut down or to try to suppress or deny or push it away because it is so intense and it is so exhausting. And an empath, when we are maxed out, can look very narcissistic and can actually look very selfish. And so I think that there really is kind of a, you know, two sides of the same coin. And a lot of times I would actually, and some people would argue that narcissism is absolutely the product of trauma and the product of, you know, it's a result, it's a behavior, it's something that arises as a result of things that happen in our life. So, you know, I think sometimes it's like the line between the two is a little bit more thin than we might want to admit.
Absolutely. And I look back at, you know, my life being an empath and understanding it a little bit more. And I think, you know, my story working in the hospital is when I really was kind of smacked in the face with it. But I look back at all of my friendships throughout all my life, and they were always people who were takers. And I was always the giver. And so I recognized this pattern within myself when I started learning the subconscious mind, diving into EFT and, you know, certain things. And I'm like, I've got to reprogram this, because for some reason I continually give, and I am attracting people who are take, but yet I had to balance that out within myself. And once I did that, I recognized my friendships changed. I had much more of a balance with people that I was connecting with. And so I wasn't recognizing it as much in my romantic relationships as I was in my friendships. And so I got to a point where I went through that hermit stage, which many of us do. We've just got to shut it off and say, okay, what energy is mine? And this is when I started to learn my mastery, is that now when I'm feeling good and I go out to the grocery store and then I start to feel a pain in my right side, I'm like, well, that wasn't there before. Now I know I'm picking that up from the woman standing next to me, you know?
Right.
So
Right.
I think as we learn
Yeah.
that, it's hard to understand what energy is ours and what energy are we picking up. And so there is that
Yeah.
fine line. And I
Yeah.
love that you're discussing this because there's such a negative kind of connotation around, you know, an empath saying narcissist, and, you know, so it's like, I like that
Right.
we're having this open discussion, that there is such a fine line there. And I can look at times in my life where I was falling more on that side. I was more in my ego. I was more in my reptilian brain, so to speak. And I was
Yep.
really pulling in what would someone would call narcissistic tendencies. And until I recognized my empathic overwhelm and I
Yes.
started to heal it and move through it and heal that inner aspect of myself, is when I really noticed it started to balance and shift. And so, you know, what are some ways that people can shift this dynamic if they're really recognizing they're attracting, if they are empathic and they're attracting more narcissists in their life?
So first off, I want to say, a couple things that were coming to my mind that I really want to acknowledge is there's two things. One is that not only are empaths picking up on the thoughts, the feelings, the energy, the sensations, the distress, the physical health issues that are going on in somebody around them, or just like the entire planet. The other thing that we pick up on are people's desire bodies and their will bodies.
Oh.
And one of the things about people who tend to be, you could identify as or define as a narcissist, is that they tend to have very strong will bodies. They tend to have very strong desire bodies, but especially they tend to have very strong will. And empaths feel that and the thing is that we feel the will, but we start getting sucked into the energy or the tractor beam of the will, and we start kind of following the momentum of it. And so a lot of times it feels like the path of least resistance to go down that rabbit hole with somebody, to kind of to oblige or acquiesce to their will. The other thing is that in my travels, I hate the word codependent
Yeah.
because I feel like it's really dismissive. And I feel like it doesn't really understand the bottom line, which is that as empaths, especially, but I think this is true for most human beings, but especially for empaths, the truth is we feel better when other people feel better.
Yeah.
We feel like crap. Hopefully, it's okay that I just
Yeah.
sweared.
Totally.
We feel like crap when other people feel like crap, and we feel better when other people feel better. So it is absolutely understandable that we will rush into rescue, that we will do everything in our power to make other people feel better until we have healed the inner stuff within us that makes it next to unbearable to be around somebody's pain.
Yeah.
Because what I have found is that our resistance to other people's pain is the thing that makes us so quick to want to rush into rescue and make things better for people.
Absolutely.
So these two things, the fact that we're going to be feeling the desire and the will, and often even like that bullying kind of energy that the narcissists have, with at the same time the fact that we feel better when they feel better, it's kind of like it's almost fated. Like we're kind of destined to end up in this dynamic until we do our work.
Yeah.
So that's sort of one of the first things I want to say before we start talking about how do we like sort of backpedal and get out of it, is just the fact that like there are things that are going to make this very natural if we are not dealing with ourselves and acknowledging ourselves as an empath. And what I would say is that the very first step to breaking the cycle of the empath and the narcissist is recognizing the impact of being highly sensitive and empathic, recognizing the ways that as an empath we give away our power, we give more than we receive, where we're kind of in these weird out of balance things. But looking at how is this serving us? How is this? Because a lot of times we will externalize the pain that we are experiencing and say, this is all coming from outside of me. When the truth is, yeah, maybe 75% of it is coming from outside of us. But the reason that it is resonating within us and it is pinging us so strongly is because there are wounds, there may be ancestral trauma, there may be karmic trauma, there may be an experience from this lifetime, but there's something that's getting, that's like the bell is getting rung inside of us. And that's why this is so painful. And so one of the things that happens is, in order for us to break that vicious cycle of giving and giving and giving and getting caught up in the power struggle and the dynamics and finding ourselves in these relationships with lack, little balance, is the willingness to stop looking at the pain as only external and actually address and look at the pain that's internal as well.
Absolutely. And so, before we started recording, you talked about how most empaths you see a narcissistic motherly aspect. Can we talk about that? Because that's an area that I've been healing, that father wound, the mother wound, all of that going back through my parents' generations and even further back. So can you talk about that? Because I do feel like this plays a role into all of this as well, healing the inner child.
Yes, absolutely. And so, first off, one thing that I've been really discovering or looking at is just like, even though on a genetic level, the theory is that genetically we pass down the trauma and we pass down genetic expression for, like a maximum of about 12 generations.
Wow.
But the thing about that is that 12 generations is the tip of the iceberg. We may be expressing like we may have, like you may not be able to quantify. It's almost like a half-life. You may not be able to quantify past the 12th or 13th generation, the way that the genetic expression is showing up. But the thing is that energetically, that does not, like, even though it might be microscopic or imperceivable, it is still there. And when it comes to sort of the energy of our ancestral lines, it goes back to the very source of origin. So I just the other day was doing some work with somebody where I actually did 2 pieces of work in the same day. And the first person was like, you've got a 23 generation patrilineal line issue here that's affecting this, and this. And then I go on and I'm talking with this other person and they look me over and they're like, you have a 600 generation thing running down the matrilineal line. Wow. Oh, no, actually that was patrilineal line. It was the 23 generations on the women, on the mother side. But 600
still seems like a lot.
A lot. But so, the thing is that we are carrying like thousands of years and hundreds of generations of experience and trauma. And what I want to say is that because of the oppression of women, because of the impact of misogyny in our culture, and because of the fact that, we as women have only had the right to vote for the last little more than 100 years. As women, we have only had the ability, especially as married women, to own a freaking credit card since the 1970s.
That's wild.
And so what this means is that women for thousands of years have been coming up against the fact that they were regarded as chattel, that they were basically regarded as property. Mm-hmm. And where domestic violence was not even something people talked about as. Okay. How much did we lose?
You're good. Keep going. We'll keep going. We're still recording. I can always edit it.
So up until very recently, like within the last, maybe, I don't even know in terms of the exact laws because I'm not a legal historian, But, conjugal rights of the husband meant that he could rape his wife anytime he wanted to, as well as a woman was not like, there's a whole sort of dark side of, even the whole thing of like women not even having their own last name,
Yeah.
that has to do with the fact that a woman was and has been regarded as property with no rights. And it's only very recently that this has changed. Now, the reason I go into this like heavy, dark, painful piece of history or talking about this
It's
is that
trauma.
this is trauma. And this is something that you can imagine every single one of us has in our ancestral line, because every single woman who lived even 50 years ago was dealing with a level of lack of sovereignty. Like, we only recently are coming into our sovereignty and our legal sovereignty. So let's just imagine that we're talking about the fact that all of these women, all of these these mothers, these grandmothers, these great grandmothers, these great great grandmothers, all of these women are carrying lifetimes and legacies of abuse, of trauma, and also of a message that you are less than male, that you are not, that you do not even exist as an agent unto yourself. And that only until very recently have women had the ability to earn their own money and to actually own their own possessions or own property or own land or any of this. And so it makes a great deal of sense that you have this legacy of victimhood, this legacy of trauma, this legacy of dependency, of all kinds of stuff that is only just starting to change. And so, with that being the case, you can imagine that many of our mothers, and especially our grandmothers, depending on your generation, or maybe for some of the listeners, if you are in maybe your like 20s, it might be even your great grandmother. But that there is, like, I guarantee you that you don't have to look very far at all to find places where you have female ancestors who were completely disempowered, who had absolutely no sovereignty. And as a result, when we can't get our needs met in healthy ways, when we can't set boundaries in healthy ways, we set them in unhealthy ways. We set them in unconscious ways. And it often shows up either as physical health issues, crises and accidents and disasters, or in behavior that is less than optimal. And so a lot of women, I think, learned how to manipulate the situation by either becoming an invalid, becoming sick, becoming a victim, becoming, like having sort of like, poor me, you have to take care of me and meet my needs. Or they became sort of like, a ball breaker, a ball buster. They became kind of cruel. But the thing is that, or some of them got into, I mean, in some ways, we're talking about fight, flight, or freeze, that you would have some people whose bodies would just go into freeze and they would go into kind of like debilitated illness. You had some people who would go into fight, where they were going to use manipulative tactics and cruelty to get what they want. And some people who would go into, like flight, just complete avoidance, escapism. And then you also had the people who went into fawn, where they were overly loving, cloying, just people pleasing the ever living crap out of everything and trying to do that. So then if we start looking at this, and it's like, it's almost inevitable that there is a way in which our mothers and our grandmothers and our great grandmothers and on and on and on could not be a thriving expression of health, and instead would have to show up like in some ways narcissism, or self-centeredness or drama is like kind of the only one of the few things that they had. But interestingly, as we talked about kind of like the different ways that it could manifest, of like, whether you're looking through the lens of, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, that, you know, it's like people often will think of the narcissist as like the grandiose, you know, the person, the egomaniac with the inferiority complex, you know, the grandiosity of the narcissist. But for women, narcissism frequently manifests as victim narcissism, where it shows up as like their trauma is bigger than everybody else's. Their disaster, their crisis is constantly trumping everything that is going on in the world. And as daughters of these generations of women who in some ways have no agency other than to be the squeaky wheel, we as these sort of daughters growing into our own sort of reconfiguring the world and finding our sovereignty, very, very often would start becoming caretakers and learn to be like accommodating our mother's trauma and pain at an extremely early age. So we kind of get groomed to not only meet the needs of perhaps the grandiose narcissist, but we also, and I think this is where it's more insidious, many of us are groomed to respond to the victim narcissist from a very, very early age. So I'm imagining from what you were saying, where you kept on being attracted to all of these friends that were just sucking the life right out of you.
Drama and trauma.
Drama and trauma. And also, I mean, you were probably groomed, and you probably also got a lot of strokes and a lot of validation as a very little girl for like making mommy feel better. Mm-hmm. I had no idea personally how utterly inappropriate it was to be my mother's confidant until I was like, had been doing like I was like in my I was in my 40s when I really started to get the degree of inappropriateness of the things I knew about my mother's relationship with my father, about the things that had happened to her as a child, about what she was going through. Like I was conditioned to listen and conditioned to try to bring ease to somebody who was, and my mom is a really interesting person because she's definitely an empath, highly sensitive and empathic, but also like it's frequently like her, it's like you know, her grandmother name is Mima, so I'll call her that. It's frequently the Mima hour. Like it's frequently about what's going on for her. Yeah. And you know, I mean, I grew up listening to the same stories, the same trauma stories over and over and over and over again. And so it didn't even occur to me that there was like this was not normal, or that this was not healthy, until I had done a lot of personal work. So I just think when it comes to this idea, let's just imagine that for almost all of us, just simply because of the nature of patriarchy, you cannot escape there being some kind of broken dynamic between us and the women who have come before us.
Yeah. Yeah. And a broken dynamic between them and then the women before them. So it's like, we can't sit here and point blame at our own mothers, because they're just programmed from their mothers and then their mothers. And it goes back, like you said, 600 plus generations. It could potentially go back.
And I mean, we are talking like 5,000 years of agriculture, patriarchy, power over, and empire that have been influencing the way we look at the world. I mean, I don't necessarily know what exactly happened, whether it's like, you know, Daniken's, like, I think that's the last name of the author, but Chariot of the Gods, that like the extraterrestrials landed here and they just were like, hey, we want to take shit from you and we're going to make this happen. But something really significant happened to us as a species about 5,000 years ago, where we went from being hunter-gatherers and living these nomadic lives, or maybe like living like cave dwelling, or, you know, like living in like moving in, you know, being in places where we would like, but we were nomadic, we moved, we shifted, you know,
survival.
I mean, even if we survived, but we were not, we didn't like there was this place where we didn't store our stuff. We were not accumulating storehouses of grain. We were not starting this whole idea of property and ownership. And when we started the idea of agriculture, when we started the whole idea of this is mine, this is the land line, this is what you're entitled to, things really shifted for us as a species because we started to believe the lie of scarcity.
Yeah.
And we stopped living in the moment of, give this our daily bread, as well as I honestly believe the understanding, the acceptance that death is part of life, and and it will happen. We started to become terrified of the idea of death, but we also started to like basically create storehouses and accumulate wealth. And kind of like we started living by the idea of he who has the most toys, like he who dies with the most toys wins. And it's kind of like, dude,
When
so
did that
not
have changed?
relevant.
Yeah.
But 5,000 years. So like, no, it's so futile to be blaming our mother, to be blaming our grandmother, to be blaming all the women that have come before. It's like, if we're going to blame anything, then let's blame the phenomenon that turned us from peaceful matrilineal hunter-gatherer societies to, like, how big can I build this building and how much shit can I accumulate before I die so I will leave a legacy. Like, and we're talking 5,000 years.
Yeah. And I think that's part of what we're doing. We're waking up to this illusion that we've been in. And, I grew up in a family where my mom took on more masculine traits than my dad. It was like a flipped reverse, role. And so I, took that on too. I saw that program that I needed to do that as well. So I've been healing that inner masculine, feminine energy within myself. And I think that's us as women and men. We need to look at those energies within ourselves and observe our parents. What have they flipped roles? Are we playing those programs out in our lives? And are we balanced in our own energies? And so there's so many layers to the onion,
so many layers to the onion.
As you dive in. And
oh my God. Yeah, just so many layers to the onion. And yeah, I mean, my mom was very type A, she was my favorite joke about my mother. She was I mean, she's still alive, but because of the dementia, I can say was, because she's just like, she's in her body's still here, but her mind's gone. But my mom was such a perfectionist. And my favorite joke about my mom is there was a point where I was like, you are such a perfectionist. And my mother just looks at me and she's like, I was like a teenager. And she's like, no, I'm really not. I'm just not that good. And I was just like, she didn't understand the irony of it. Like, she did, like, I think it's one of the funniest things she's ever said. She just was like, but really, I'm just not that good. And I'm like, yeah, right. Yeah, you're just such a perfectionist. Like, thanks so much. But
yeah, and passing that trait down. And
oh my God,
did that too, working through the OCD and yeah.
It's brutal. And then the self-doubt, because you can never compare. Like, I was just like constantly, there's no way I'm ever going to be as good as she is, because she was just, I mean, she was a straight A student, type A personality, just constantly knocking, like just on top of it. And
well, you wonder where she got that from, clearly from her, programming. And so,
yeah. And I mean, I honestly, it's funny. I honestly don't think, from what I know about my grandmother, and I certainly know, like, I'm named after my great grandmother, and my great grandmother was apparently an extremely loving, very, very generous, very kind woman who did not have like a mean bone in her body. My grandmother was apparently quite the biatch. Like, she was very harsh and very cruel, and apparently I think ended up like a lot of trauma, lost a lot of her brothers. They were fishermen who died at sea. And so she had a lot of stuff, but I don't get the impression that my grandmother was the kind of like perfectionist or control freak that my mother is. I think in my mother's case, perfectionism was like her it was like her meal ticket, or it was like her train ticket out. Like it was her,
Or
like
her
her
control
coping. It was her
mechanism.
control mechanism and
Yeah.
her way to get to the others, to change her life. Because
Yeah.
my mom was the first person with a college education. She was actually she was the only person among her siblings, and probably the first person in her entire family line to get a college degree, much less a professional master's degree.
Yeah.
So my mom really broke a lot of cycles
That's
and
awesome.
really did a lot of things, including stopping the cycle of child abuse and violence. The buck completely stopped with her. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful, because she really did make some choices, but she never really figured out how to get past her own perseveration, how to get past her own rumination, how to get out of her own way. And God bless my mother, like, she worried her way into a TIA. Like my
Oh.
mother broke her brain because she worried and perseverated so much. And, but I am incredibly thankful for all of the ways that my mom stopped a lot of vicious cycles. And now me and my brother and my sister, we get to take it to the next level of stopping yet another set of cycles and letting things be different.
Yeah. And it's just, the density that our grandmothers went through, and then the density that our moms went through, and now the density that we're going through. It's like, here's the baton. We're running a marathon here, and we're just, passing down the torch and picking up, okay, what cycles can I break? Which ones am I not capable of in this lifetime, and which ones am I capable of? And so I guess for me, I never had children, and maybe that was my soul's way of saying I'm going to end some of these cycles. And
Exactly.
I think there's a lot of empaths out there. I've met so many that have not had children, and I'm in my mid 40s. And so, I think on a soul level, there was a reason for that. And my sister as well, she has not had children either. So
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
breaking cycles in ways that are making some significant changes in our DNA, in our generational
absolutely.
patterns. And so we have to honor that. We have to honor what our grandmothers and our mothers went through to get us. There's a reason why we were born, to be able to pick up that baton and to move through that. And so this has been such a rich conversation, Jennifer. I feel like we could talk
Oh my God, we
more
can
about
talk
this.
forever. We could talk and talk and talk
I know,
completely.
and
Yeah.
I would love to have you on the show again, because I feel like
I would love to come back.
we
Yeah,
could go
I'm
into
sure you
so
and I
much
could
more
find so many
topics.
things. Yeah, yeah.
And I really enjoy this, but I want you to, share with the listeners and the watchers about your book, share about your show. How can people reach out to you if they want to schedule a session with you? They want to connect with you. They want to learn more about their empathic mastery. How do they reach out to you?
How do they reach out to me? Okay, so the easiest thing to do is just come on over to empathicmastery.com, and that will lead you to all the things. If you're like listening and you're like, oh my God, I totally want to find the thing. If you want to find the book, empathicmasterybook.com makes it really, really simple. And also if you are like, love the EFT and want to learn more and become an impeccable, spectacular EFT practitioner, I do a professional training that is very thorough once a year, starting in the spring. And the link to that is eftinstruction.com. But like I said, all the things you can get to through empathicmastery.com. And the book, I'll just say really briefly, is a two-part book. The first part talks about the why and the what of being highly sensitive empathic. Who are we? Why are we this way? What are the ramifications of this? And what does this really mean? And then the second part of the book is my 5-step system to go from, quote, emotional hot mess to thriving success. And it is all about learning how, and the 5 steps are: recognize, because we have to recognize that we're picking up empathic distress before we can do anything else. So recognize, release, releasing the stuff that is no longer serving us, releasing the stuff that is not ours, then protect. instead of the suggestion that so many people make, which is put up a bubble of light, just like send love and light to it. It's
no.
like, no. If you just
crystals.
put up a ball of light or wear crystals in your bra before you've addressed the stuff that you're already carrying, it's going to erode from the inside, and you're just
amplifies it.
It will amplify it because you're in a freaking bell jar.
And you're in a bubble.
And we're in a bubble, and then all the negativity is just bouncing off the inside. So protect comes third, and that's about energetic and spiritual boundaries, as well as logistical, emotional boundaries, like learning how to say no. Sorry, I'm not going to meet that need for you anymore. And then from protect comes connect, because the universe abhors a vacuum. And in order for us to not continuously seek out and take on more toxic negativity and energy, we must fill it with something different. And so connect is about connecting to a power greater than ourselves, allowing us to start receiving divine guidance and really letting ourselves be infused with that divine love that is really what the planet is, or the universe is made of. And then from connect finally is act, which has to do with how do we live as a responsible empath, as opposed to a basically hot mess empath. How do we make choices that allow us to live in the world in a whole new way? So all of that, 380 pages of like my trial and error and like my love letter to the like brokenhearted, like bleeding out hot mess adolescent I once was, and to all of the rest of us, this is my love letter. And this is like, I wrote this book for my future incarnation, with the hope that I will come across this book when I am like a struggling adolescent empath in the next lifetime, so that I don't have to go through the decades of distress that I went through in this one.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, that sounds so valuable. I used to say that I was the hot mess express. I mean, the amount of emotions that were coming through me. And so for all of you out there, all of you empaths out there, even narcissists out there, who knows what category, we shift, we change, we move as we heal, we shift our frequencies, and we definitely align, with different people, different perspectives, different personalities. And so check out Jennifer's website, check out her work, check out her podcast, check out her book, and take these valuable tools. They are priceless. They are absolutely priceless. If I would have had Jennifer's book 15 years ago, when I was in my hot mess express, reality, I would have just soaked all of that information up, because it's part of our journey too, to go through this. It is part of our journey.
It is part of our journey. And there's also a way in which it's like you can't see it until you see it. And I really do think that we are also coming to a level of understanding, and things are lightening up in a way that is new, that is different. And there's a lot of things we can do now that we could not do before. And so, I also just want to say, I am also somebody who decided not to have children. And I actually believe that those of us who decide not to have children, what we become is the terminal point in the chain. And it becomes our obligation to do all of that ancestral healing and that soul work to clear the stuff, so that we basically are ending cycles that have been legacies that have been going on forever.
Absolutely. And I thought I was an anomaly when I was like, oh, I'm in my 40s and I don't have children. But then I started to meet other women too. And so, there's definitely a reason for that. If you are out there and you have not had children, and, just know that you're not alone in that process. And Jennifer, I loved this topic. I loved the content. Thank you for sharing all of your your experience and the information that you have, kind of trial and errored yourself to be able to share with the audience today. I would love to have you come back on the show again. And
I would love to come back.
So if there's topics out there that all of you are wanting to learn more about along the empath, spectrum, then please leave them in the comments, and I will bring Jennifer back on and we will have a conversation about these topics, because this is just priceless. And thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate your energy, and I really appreciate your time that you spent with us today.
Oh, it has been such a pleasure, Tanya. Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
You deserve to navigate your life as an empath in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT tapping, and the Emotion Code, visit my website at www.thesoulcafe.org.